finally happened. We had a player character die in the mill beneath Brightmasson, and it wasn't due to any enemy, nor was it due to any exactly a trap, but mostly a bad roll and an obstacle. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. It has become obvious that Basic Fantasy RPG has become quickly my most popular series of stuff to put videos on. And so this humble little blogging channel thanks you for the views and for the subscribers I've had. Excuse me. Get a little tongue-tied every now and then. I'm joined by my youngest one laying down here, so you'll just have to excuse the background noise and everything else that comes with it. But I wanted specifically to talk today about player character death and dice fudging and why I don't fudge dice. So, you see, I'm relatively new to the hobby. I started with the 5e. I'm 33 years old. So, uh, by the time I finally had time to play anything with anybody, especially during the pandemic when the factory was closed down for 2 months while I sat at home, really, um, we we had a Facebook group that I first got in contact with some guys on, and I started with 5e. And this is not a knock on 5e. I enjoy 5e. Wish it was more lethal experience, more low magic, a little bit too high fantasy for me, if you get what I mean. Nothing wrong with high fantasy. I enjoy Tolkien and stuff like that, but even his works was not quite that high magic. Okay, continuing on. But something I've noticed in the hobby, because I've been a GM, a game master, that's the term I use because that's the term most games use. Been a game master for almost a year, right? So, and my first system GMing for was Basic Fantasy RPG. It's a system I know quite well. It's a system that I enjoy, and of course that got me into the rabbit hole of what the OSR is. And so, when I wanted to talk about specifically this, it's a little triumph of geometry when you really think about it. These little math rocks that we use in the hobby determine a lot of things: success, failure, whether we hit something, whether we don't. And in the case of OSRs, especially when there's save or die, poison, life or death. And so I believe firmly, remaining firm to the game. So I just rolled that a little bit on my side table. Let's say I was running down a dungeon. I hit a plate, a dart shoots out from the wall. I'm struck, and I feel the heat of the poison running into my veins. Did I survive? Well, no. 4 was what I got, and so I don't know where your character's at, but most games I play, 4 is definitely a failure. So, continuing on. Anyways, continuing on. I find it funny though, because one of the first things I did whenever I was interested in running a game was, of course, looking up tips on YouTube. And which, because I've simply never had played or GM'd before, 33 years old, never had done it. Didn't know anybody who played the game personally. Still having trouble finding personal players. Anyways, so as I was looking up these tips, trying to learn how to run the game efficiently, trying to know how to run it better, so to speak, trying to get everything set up for the when I finally hit my first campaign, run my first little session, um, I had to settle on play by post, and I'm still running play by post. Although I have some news, I will talk about it in the video. And by the end of it, I was confused because most of these videos assume for more modern editions of the game, not just 5e, but more modern editions. And I find it funny because there seems to be a cognitive dissonance between some points that they make. On one hand, they will tell you don't worry about writing this big story or arc. You're not a novelist, this, that, and everything else. While at the same time telling that player character death has to mean something narratively, which is odd to me because, by the simple matter of fact, people in fiction do not always die with a narrative in mind. So they, and in real life, it's the same way too. Is there any reason for somebody to die in a car wreck? Absolutely not. It just happens. Is there any reason for somebody to fall down the stairs and perish from their injuries? Absolutely not. It just happens. And so, why should our characters be expected any different? After all, this is what happened beneath Brymason. We had a character scaling a wall, and normally very skilled. He just finally had a bad roll. His luck had run out, and the dice had decided that it was his time. Now, many people out there would say that what I did was mean, because what it was a 10-foot pit. He fell, and that doesn't always guarantee death. However, this character has 3 HP. He insisted on rolling his HP at first level, and so I allowed him to do that, despite me having an optional rule for everybody, because we had a few new players, to have the max possible HP. So he took 3. Now the with his stats, the max possible he would have had was 5, with a con of 1, +1 con modifier. Use D4 hit die. So max possible would have been 5 for him, and by the end of it, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, because when I rolled the D6 for the damage, it was a 5. And so he perishes beneath Brymason. However, the players are going to try to get him resurrected, which is something I've always put in my games as a try again. It's I'm not so much as to say this as to deny them to have that, because I do like to have some kind of magical religious system within my world. It's very low magic-y campaign to begin with, but raising the dead does exist in my worlds. Indeed, oftentimes the only reason most people attend the church in my worlds or become clerics to begin with is to learn these spells to heal and to resurrect. So, of course, this is going to come at a price, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. However, there are people out there that would say what I did was mean, because they are used to their dungeon master or game master or referee or whatever you call it lying to them. They are used to it. They are used to their dungeon master, their referee, pulling their fat out of the fire, saving their character at the last instant whenever it becomes too hard for them, whenever they are about to die. And so they are used to having that happen. People watch YouTube streams all the time, and in fact, a particular famous one that even has a Netflix series is infamous for fudging these dice rolls, for lying. People will say that I am mean because they believe my job is to tell a story. It is not. The story arises from the adventure, not any kind of scripted event that I could plan. When you go hunting or fishing, does a hunting or fishing story come about because it was planned? No, it happens because that's what happened on the trip. And it's the same with adventures. What happens on the adventure is the story. That is your character's backstory, especially at level 1. You shouldn't be writing this weird, strange fan fiction with like 3 paragraphs. Not even a paragraph. Actually, shouldn't be more than 1 or 2 sentences. You can have things like what their mother and father's names were, certainly. Were they military people or not? But the simple statement of fact is that at level 1, the character is not a hero. They have no reputation of being a hero, and they have no power of being a hero. They don't have the skill level of a hero, and so the players shouldn't expect that at all. But for some strange reason, this is what people have come to expect through the years. Especially as time has gone on and we've gotten further and further away from the older editions, the basic multi set or the expert cook sets, or even Gygax's AD&D sets. The further away we get away from these, the less and less it looks like the games that were actually played back in the 70s and 80s, and the 90s actually too, because those were the only editions still going around in the 90s until Wizards of the Coast um, bought the license from TSR, and anyway, after TSR was bought out by Wizards of the Coast in the 90s, and Wizards made 3rd edition. So, anyways, and by the time third edition came about, it was painfully obvious that there was a different philosophy at mine. Just take a look at the cover art of many of the books. Many of the books from before Wizards of the Coast portray characters who are perishing or escaping an obstacle, trying to get away from the danger because they simply do not have the skill level. Whereas everything post Wizards has been epic. I'm on par with this evil, or I'm going to defeat it kind of imagery. And of course, as if being an overpowered, strange um, build wasn't enough. If having 46 drop the lowest and having death saves and having these strange powers, like you get extra turns and more abilities as it levels up throughout the years, as more as that has come about through gameplay and been added as a mechanic to each and every subsequent edition, the further and further away we get away from what made these games what they were. These dangerous romps through a dungeon. Sometimes you are not the character that finds the treasure and makes it out. Sometimes you are not the one that finds the damsel in distress and rescues her and brings her to the surface. In fact, most of the time, your character, especially at level 1, is a skeleton that is resting against the wall. A symbol of the failure of the past adventurer. And so most people, because the philosophy, even in the books, as time has gone on, um, are used to saying, "Oh, the dice rolls can be fudged." Here's what, because the philosophy has switched the game master or the dungeon master or referee or whatever into a storyteller, which was never the job. Our job was always to be the fair, unbiased, impartial referee. And if I was to help Damien live, to pull his fat out of the fire, right? To pull his fat out of the fire, that would not be fair or impartial whatsoever. Indeed, that would take away the lethality of what the obstacle was. The obstacle did its job, did 1d6 damage, and it killed somebody. Another corpse in the bottom of the pit. It's what it did. If I would have pulled Damien's fat out of the fire and lied to him, what did he learn? Could he have learned to be careful? Could he have learned to not split off from the group and try to take needless risks? Absolutely. Could have done that if I would have fudged the dice rolls, but really, what would he have learned if he would have just learned that I'm going to save you? Nothing whatsoever. And so, people have this false idea that our job is to tell a story, but it's not. The story has to happen organically. And really, as much as I love, you know, narration and narratives and stuff like that, I dislike it in my RPG games for the most part because the Hickman model, you'll hear about it all the time. The Hickman model simply makes everything muddy and murky. The story takes precedence over the gameplay, and so imagine if you were playing a video game and you just did nothing but watch cutscenes. That's a very boring slog. I hate games like that where all you do is watch cutscenes. Maybe you'll have a quick time event, but for the most part, it's just mostly movie production and stuff like that. I hate those kind of games. Can't stand them. I want to play, and I want to play right now. I bought a game to play. And it's funny because you'll have many in the same community that will say that they too hate when that happens. But anyway, yeah, many in the community that will complain about that, and yet they are the ones that do it. You make your player characters sit through a cutscene essentially. I can't stand it. That's not what the game is. Now, I've had to modify some things along the years, indeed, with trying to appeal to players into trying to have a story. And so role playing goes on, in my opinion, for far too long and for far too much. I would much rather just stick them in a dungeon and have them come back and go to the shop, re gear up, maybe go to sleep, in the tavern or whatever. maybe pick up another job or two, and then go back to the dungeon. Instead, I've had to resort to modernizing that kind of interaction so that I could simply have players for my games. I dislike it. I don't like it very much, but be that as it may, they enjoy it. And after all, if they're having fun, then what does it matter? My fun is the danger that comes from the dungeons, from the world getting ready to interact with them. Haldoran is uh, a very hostile place, and so I finally had found players who wanted that OSR experience, and they wanted to have it through a weekly video chat. And so this is why I have chosen the name of this upcoming campaign. It's going to still take place in Haldoran, which is a world, and we're going to use Morgansfort for that one too. But it's going to be a much different experience. Going to stress dungeon delving much more, and so I've called it the Mortal Coil. And for those of you who English might not be your first language, or maybe you've never encountered the term before, it simply means the struggles of daily life. When one sheds their mortal coil, it means they have died. Their troubles in this life are over. They go on to the afterlife and face what happens there. And so, I wanted to say, as I conclude this video, that I plan on making this a series, and our first game for the Mortal Coil will be tomorrow night. So far, I have 3 players, 2 separate players who I'm reserving seats in about another month or two. They simply won't be available, but I'm going to have 3 players at least. And it'll be finally time for somebody to experience the kind of experience that I want to have that OSR experience that I wanted to have, that high lethality, that stresses gameplay over storylines. I hate storylines. Like I said, I would rather play in a game in which the gameplay will stress, not the story. And so we're going to be rolling some of these little nifty dice rocks, these little math rocks. And again, I don't fudge. And we have a dice tray. We use Dice Maiden on this server for rolling up our characters, and of course, I believe they're going to be using it for their games. But, anyways, we're going to try to get more players. And so, I want to extend a hand of invitation out there to people if you are interested in playing in this game, in the Mortal Coil, to have this experience with us. Again, we have 30 players, and we have 2 more that are going to be um, they're going to be out of pocket until next month, and so that's 5 players. We have room for 3 more, and so if you simply want to be part of our game, we're going to be having it on Thursday nights, probably around 7:30 p.m. ish. Not this Thursday though, not tomorrow night, because if we did that tomorrow night, I would miss my girls' birthday party. So we're going to tomorrow night will be more around 9:30 ish, but we are going to start gameplay then tomorrow night, and we are going to get started with our characters and get started in the campaign. And what we're going to do is we're going to have that experience that we want. I'm probably the youngest one in that group, 33 years old. I wasn't around for most of the stuff, and so I'm fairly new, and I'm going to be the game master, and so we have mostly a lot of forever GMs. So I'm giving that experience to somebody else, and we're going to switch out GM duty on occasion. We want that high lethality experience. And so if you wish to join our campaign, simply leave me a comment and we'll let you in. This life is rough, but that's part of the fun. Dying's the easy part. Living is the hard part. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to have another video out soon. We'll be dealing with the Morgansfort play by post, and I will be informing you guys on what happens with that. And then, of course, once we have the Mortal Coil going, we will start it tomorrow. Whether it succeeds or fails, I'm going to still have my little thumbnail up for the Mortal Coil, because whether I have a story driven game or not, it still gets across what I like in my games and the lethality of it. So hopefully we'll have something to report on the Mortal Coil soon as well. So thank you guys. God bless. You take care of yourselves out there.